Well, good morning, everybody.
G'day.
Good morning, Dave.
How you going?
Good, mate. How's your leg feeling, buddy?
Oh, getting there.
He's still in his wheelchair, and we're still in his office. But you know what? I'm actually going to be away for the next 3 weeks, over visiting Kaz's family in Western Australia. So
we'll have a break from.
we might have a break
again.
from 3O Thursday.
Again,
So
yep.
3O Theology Thursday. So what do we got for the people today?
Well,
Dave?
last week we were looking at Daniel's 70th week, and we showed that it had a historical application rather than an end times application. And we've been asked a few questions about the days of Noah, which is another end times thing that some people think it is. Jesus mentioned this in Matthew 24. And we want to really address a couple of the issues that have been raised. So first, let's read the actual verses.
Yeah, cool.
So out of Matthew 24, as it was in the days of Noah, this is starting at verse 37, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Now, Luke makes a similar quote. He quotes the same passage. So just to compare it, Luke 17:26. Just as it was in the days of Noah, so also it will be in the days of the Son of Man. People were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, up to the day that Noah entered the ark, and then the flood came and destroyed them all. Now, because people say this is an end times passage, they say that we can expect to see on earth during what some call this 7-year Great Tribulation period. We're going to see many of the things that were evident in Noah's time, according to...
I suppose people assume that when it says, before the coming of the Son of Man, everyone's assuming that's referring to the second coming of the Son of Man, which of course hasn't happened yet. And so, in the days before Noah, it was pretty bad.
It was.
So bad that God decided to flood the whole earth. But is that what it's referring to?
Well, some extend this idea by referring back to the 10 toes on Daniel's statue, which we talked about last week. And it was they were made of iron and clay, two things that don't mix.
Okay.
And so they say that just as it was in Noah's days, they claim humans crossed with fallen angels, there's the iron and the clay, you see, to produce another race of Nephilim hybrid creatures.
Yes, and of course we know that the toes of iron and clay refer to the Roman Empire.
That's it.
And
the 10
and
Caesars.
and the 10 Caesars, and that it was brittle, and even Daniel describes that. So carry on.
Okay, so this they reckon people that subscribe to this is a repeat of the sons of God mixing with the daughters of men in the antediluvian world. So I think it's good to look at that claim and just.
So for those, if you read the story of Noah, sure enough, just before that, back in Genesis chapter 6, you see this passage where what David's referring to, sons of man and the sons of God and the daughters of man, and everyone thinks that means angels having sex with human women.
So the Nephilim were certainly very large people. They were giants. And it's been suggested that some of them actually stood up to 9 meters tall. But that's just speculation.
I've heard 9 feet, but I've not heard 9 meters.
30-something feet.
That's crazy.
There's certainly no evidence of that. The reality is that poor nutrition and illness in childhood limits human growth. And as a consequence, the average height of a population is strongly correlated with the living standards in the population, plus, of course, genetics. Now, based on these skeletal remains that people have been able to find, it's estimated that the average height of a man in 4000 BC would have been less than 5'4", 163 centimetres. And this gradually increased to about the 1700s, where the average come up to about 5'6", 170 centimetres. But with the onset of modernity and all of the health advantages and medicines and better food and all that sort of thing, hygiene, we see a sudden...
People have grown taller.
They have. It's a sudden spike that's added another 3 inches in a far shorter period
Yeah.
than has happened in the past. So the average height of man today is about 5'9",
Yeah.
175
So we're talking a
centimetres.
few inches, not a few meters.
No, that's it.
They-
That's it.
But yeah, interesting.
But even by today's standards, people like Robert Wadlow, who is in the Guinness Book of Records as the tallest man who's ever lived, so that's certainly modern times.
He was about 9 feet tall, wasn't
Yeah, he was 2.72 metres, so 8'11".
Wow.
Now, he would be a giant.
he? Yeah, 100%.
And particularly if you're on the shorter end of the scale. So,
But he's tall because he has a genetic
It's a
malfunction. So
yep. So when the Bible refers to giants, it may well be just referring to people of extraordinary height, just as we have today. That might have been the basketball team. From there.
Well, Dave, I know that before the flood, we know that people lived very long lives. And so perhaps they lived very tall lives as well. That's a possibility because, I've heard a theory that the flood introduced some dramatic genetic changes to people, and so our life expectancy during that time, like after the flood, before the flood there was Methuselah and several others that lived well over 900 years old, and then after the flood, it just dropped to 300, 200, 100.
So we don't know. Look, it's speculation, but there's no fossil record of any human being more than around the 3.5 metres. One scientist claimed that a few skeletal remains that he dug up, that was one arm, two legs, of a human being, was in France, may indicate that the guy was, say, 3.5 or 11'6". Now, he would have certainly been a giant, but nothing like the 9 metres that some people would have claimed.
No.
So 30 feet or 9 metre tall Nephilim have no basis in history or anthropology. Just there's been some tall people in every generation. Sure. Now, of course, there's other issues with the idea.
I should mention, if you have happened to stumble across, comes around every 5 years or so on the internet, stumble across some photographs of some archaeologists working on and sort of brushing the sand off extraordinarily big skeletons. That's actually a Photoshop. It's a fake. That was a Photoshop competition done many, many years ago, and those photos keep doing the rounds, and Christians think that it means, this is the Nephilim.
It's a bit like the spaghetti trees that the BBC produced. Now, there's other issues with the idea that the Nephilim were products of relationships between angels and human women. For this to be the case, the angels would have needed to have had human DNA for reproduction to be successful. Certainly for any offspring to be able to reproduce.
So they would have to be carbon-based, like physical.
And this is problematic theologically because it either means that men and angels have the same DNA, therefore neither are unique, and the Bible indicates that they are, or that Satan or angels have a creative ability.
Not the case.
It's true that Satan and demons are able to possess another creature, be it human or animal, such as pigs. We know that story.
That's a good story.
And they can even take on the appearance of a human being.
Can angels.
Yes, absolutely. But to make themselves the same as man would require an act of creation. And I suggest that such acts of creation of human life are limited to the divine prerogative, and such power is not delegated to angels, fallen or otherwise. So that's a bit of an issue biblically, theologically. There's another theological issue. The sons of Anak were described as giants as well.
Yeah, Goliath and his cohort.
But if the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood, how did they manage to survive?
Some people do some extraordinary theological acrobatics to make that work, and how Anak was part of the Nephilim that escaped the flood, and of course nobody escaped the flood except Noah, I think you'll find in the Bible. So
that's it. I guess there are some people that believe that the flood was only Mesopotamian based, but we'll deal with that maybe one time, but that's certainly not the case. Maybe there were more fallen angels involved. How did Goliath get to be so tall? Was he a human angelic hybrid as well?
No.
There's got to be a better answer. Jesus actually exposed a problem with the idea of angel-human offspring. In Matthew 22, he said, For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels of God in heaven.
Wow.
Now, the context I know is referring to a resurrection, but Jesus clearly says that the angels do not marry. They're sexless spirit beings, and it is impossible for them to procreate.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the big differences between man and the angelic. They were created en masse.
Yeah. What we're referring to there in the afterlife, as it were, is that no, even us humans, we won't be procreating in the afterlife. Sorry, everybody, it's not going to happen. Just like the angels don't. So yeah.
Well, if they could, society would be full of current examples. If angels could do that, but there's none. So no, the sons of God who took wives from the daughters of men are not fallen angels.
No.
There's the line of contention that we get in Genesis 6:4. The sons of God came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. And verse 2 says that the sons of God took the daughters of men as wives. Now, these verses are fascinated Bible readers for centuries. Who were the giants and the sons of God? Who were the Nephilim? Who were the sons of God and the daughters of men? You sort of addressed that pretty well, I think.
I did. About a year and a year ago, year and a half ago.
On Theological Thursday. And so if you want to find out about that, it's still on our channel, on our YouTube channel. So
scroll back. There, I think you'll find the thumbnail. The old YouTube thumbnail has got me with my finger in my eye in my backyard.
It does. Yeah.
So that's the one on Nephilim. You'll enjoy it. It actually explains the theological what that actually is theologically.
Yeah.
So you'll enjoy it. Yeah, it's
so
fascinating.
There's been many ideas that people have come up with as to who these sons of God and daughters of men were, but the most likely, and it's what you talked about, is simply that the sons of God were the descendants of the righteous line of Seth.
Yep.
They were the God followers.
Yep.
And the daughters of men were descendants of the unrighteous line of Cain. And when these two lines began to intermarry and threaten the continuity of a righteous line from Adam to Christ, God intervened. Hence the flood.
Yeah.
So,
and that happened several times throughout the Old Testament where the righteous line was threatened. And that's one of the themes throughout the Old Testament. If you follow that theologically, is the righteous line that leads us to Jesus eventually is threatened. Several times. One that pops to mind is when Haman was going to kill all the Jews and Esther was raised up. When they were in Babylon. So there's several times when the righteous line, when the salvation of all mankind is actually threatened. If Jesus doesn't come, then it's doomed. We're doomed. Curtains for all life. So it's very important that we keep that righteous line alive.
So there were no angel-human hybrids in the days of Noah.
Sorry to disappoint you.
Yeah, there won't be any in the future either. So we can pretty much rule that one out.
So if it's not talking about that, when it says in the days before Noah, what do you think it's talking about, Dave?
Look, I think that the whole idea of Nephilim returning and a whole lot of other scary type things is centered on the doctrine that's widespread among contemporary Protestants of the secret rapture, the Darby Dispensationalist Model. And basically,
for those of you who follow us on our Theology Thursday, you know that neither Dave or I are fans of that particular model, even though it's very popular.
It's popular with some, in the Western world, but it was really unheard of before the 19th century, or the late 19th century, except for a brief period during the Reformation, where a Jesuit developed some of that. But this doctrine teaches that before, or maybe during, depending on which version of the doctrine you have, before this great tribulation, that this is all going to happen just before the end of the world, before the millennium, which is 1,000-year reign, which Christ will reign on the earth according to that model. And before all that happens, Christians are going to be raptured into the air to escape the sufferings of those who remain on earth. Now, this is not the way we see it. We've discussed this previously, and these are also on YouTube, so you can duck back and have a look at a series we did on that. But something to think about. Jesus said that it will be like the days of Noah before the Son of Man comes. Now,
so what's he referring to there?
I think two things we've got to look at. What were the days of Noah actually like? And what is the coming of the Son of Man?
Right.
So first up, the days of Noah. What did Jesus mean? He was simply saying that people were doing normal things. They were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. Jesus is telling his disciples that life will just be going on as usual when the judgment comes against Jerusalem. That's really
and look, I'd just point out to you, this is not Dave's opinion. This is Jesus' words.
Yeah.
So when we ask what were the days of Noah like, well, Jesus says those very words. You know, it was people were going on eating and drinking, so unaware that they were about to be deluged with water. Now, yes, it was bad, morally, and there was a lot of corruption. And like I said, the very line of Jesus was being threatened. People were moving quickly away from monotheism. When you look at the various places that came about after the flood, quite quickly, just after the flood, you go to Mesopotamia, they became polytheists, like lots of guys. You go to Egypt, Pharaoh was God. You go to the Hittites, they were polytheists. So there's a lot of polytheism, and so God was trying to maintain the line of Jesus, a monotheistic, God-fearing, one God, creator of all. He had to preserve that. But apart from that, yes, there was a lot of moral problems like there is today. Bad enough for God to say, look, let's stop this. But Jesus is saying that my point isn't how bad it was. My point is that they were just going about doing normal things.
And Jesus in Matthew 24 was referring to the sacking of Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem. And he was saying that people are just going to do all of their normal things, and then suddenly this destruction will come on them. And it would happen before the current generation passed away. That's what Jesus said. Likewise, Luke's account of the time just before Sodom's destruction.
Yeah, very similar.
It says, it was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating and they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. That's Luke 17. So exactly the same thing. They were just doing their normal thing, and then judgment suddenly came.
Yeah.
So Jesus was saying that people would simply go on doing that, selling, buying, building. In other words, just normal life without any idea.
Nothing to see here, people. Carry on.
No regard to an impending judgment. So we don't need to make any more of it than that.
No.
That's what it says. That's what it is.
No angel-human hybrid giants. No rampaging, fire-breathing dragons.
I think we can just take the Bible at face value. This is what it says.
Yeah.
So the coming of the Son of Man. This one's a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
Because people have got ideas on this that they've been fed over the years.
Which coming are they referring to? Is it the second coming? Is that what he's referring to?
One of the big questions. In Matthew 10:23, and I think we've got to look here first, and that gives us a little bit of a picture. Okay. Jesus was instructing his disciples, telling them to declare the coming of the kingdom to all Israel. He said, "When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. Truly I tell you, you will not reach all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes."
Okay, so
did Jesus get it wrong?
You will not reach all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes.
Yep.
Well, Dave, all of the towns of Israel have been reached.
And he hasn't come back. The return of Christ hasn't happened.
So he cannot be referring to the second coming.
No, he can't.
But he's also not referring to his first coming.
Precisely.
Because he was standing there. So his first coming, Jesus, baby, born in we're going to celebrate that Christmas time, born in Bethlehem, first coming. Second coming hasn't happened yet. So what other coming is there? Well, what are we talking about here?
Well, what he said and what he didn't say is also important.
Yes.
He tells them to go to Israel, but specifically says, do not go to the Samaritans, do not go to the Gentiles. Now, it's important that you grab that thought, hang on to it as we try and work out why he tells them that.
Because we know later He tells them in Acts chapter 1, now go to the Gentiles, to the Samaritans, go to, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. So he does want that eventually, but he's saying in this passage, not yet.
Don't do it.
Not yet. Don't just wait for it. Wait for it.
The term the Son of Man comes out of Daniel 7.
Yes, it does.
Where one like the Son of Man comes to God the Father, and the Father anoints him and gives him authority over all nations. So the coming of the Son of Man is not him coming back to earth, but him coming to the Father. The Son of Man coming to the Father, being anointed with glory and honour and given power and authority over the nations.
Yes.
It's the same thing going on in Matthew with the use of the Son of Man term. Jesus says, the Son of Man will not come will not come before the gospel has gone to all the towns of Israel.
Right.
So what does that mean? Well, it means that the Son of Man is going to come to the Father and receive authority over all the nations. But it hasn't happened yet, so don't go to all those nations, stick to the Jews.
You see this sense of order in Romans when Paul is saying first it had to go to the Jewish people, and in heaven he's very big on being fair. So he can say that the whole of Israel had their chance and they rejected the Messiah. So then it went out to the Gentiles. It had to be in that order so that the Jewish people couldn't say, hang on a minute, I never heard this. Yeah, you did. It happened here. So this is what this is referring to. When the Son of Man comes to the Father, so when Jesus goes to the Father and all of the nations, of the tribes of Israel and the towns of Israel have heard the gospel, the Father will say, okay, they've had their chance, now it's time for the Gentiles.
Precisely. And obviously this is what happens in Matthew after the resurrection, because in chapter 28, Jesus says to his disciples, essentially, that the prophecy has been fulfilled because he has been given all authority. He said all authority is given in heaven and earth. So that had been delegated to him. So that coming of the Son of Man to the Father, to be anointed, to go to all of the nations, he then says to his disciples, not just to preach to the towns of Israel, but go into the whole world and preach to all nations, teaching them to obey the things that he has taught them. And he says, I'm going to be with you. Yeah. So,
interestingly, though, like you said last week, this was when we're talking about the 70 weeks and that last 7-year period that a lot of end times people make a lot about. That, we have at the death and resurrection of Jesus, all authority is given to him. So it's like God saying, all right, we're good to go. But it's not actually, so in Acts 1:8, he says, I want you to be witnesses in Jerusalem, Samaria, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. But it's not until Acts 8:1 when there's a great persecution breaks out and they actually go. And there was that split in that he dies and rises again in the middle of that 7-year period from the start of his ministry to his death and resurrection, and then another 3.5 years till when it actually goes to the Gentiles.
So the prophecy concerning the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 10 is actually fulfilled in Matthew 28, as Jesus, through his death and resurrection, is given all of that authority, and he's commissioned his church to go out now and preach, not just to the Jews, but to every nation. It was fulfilled just as Jesus said it would be before the generation he was addressing had passed away. And when you look at Matthew 24 and the Olivet passage, so many times Jesus says, this generation shall not pass until. And he keeps referring to this generation. And he actually got it right. And at some times the modern theologians have got it wrong. But Jesus got it right.
Often when we read theology, you do have to look at the words and really, is he being literal or is he being figurative? And that's a really important question to ask, especially when you're reading the book of Revelation or any of these apocryphal writings. But in this case, it's literal. He did mean that generation that he was speaking to, that he was alive in. And as we know, that generation surely did see the destruction of Jerusalem. And
the end of the age came, the end of the age of sacrifice, the end of the whole age of law, basically, and grace was released.
No more of that. And it started, Jesus seated on the throne, the Lamb of God that was the one sacrifice for all was finally
So
All good. So
there's a bit to chew on there.
yeah, there is. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sure it's raised some questions. So the best thing that we would both, Dave and I would both encourage you to do is do your own research as well. Just broaden the things you read that go beyond just people that are pushing the Darbyism model. Stretch yourself. Have a look and see what other theologians are saying. What over the millennia, what they've been saying, and you might be surprised. So God bless you. Go back to the last year's one and find the one I did on the Nephilim.
And the ones on the end times.
Yeah, we've got a few back there on the end times. So happy hunting. See ya.
Bless you.